Montana, February 1949. Nobody noticed what was happening inside that cabin. From the road, it looked ridiculous. A wartime Quonset hut buried under what appeared to be a haystack. Neighbors called it the barn that thinks it's a house. The county's most respected mason said it was dangerous. The fire marshal said it wouldn't last one winter. But when the coldest February in recorded history hit the Bitterroot Valley, something impossible happened. While brick-insulated homes burned through cords of wood and still couldn't break 60 degrees, that hay pile stayed at 72, using half the fuel. Today, you're going to understand why the worst idea became the most copied building technique in 3 counties. If you want to receive a real frontier technique every week, methods that worked when survival wasn't optional, hit subscribe right now. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. You're about to see engineering that humiliated the experts. Let's go back to where it started. Winter of 1947, Bitterroot Valley, Montana. Raymond Calloway stood inside his surplus Quonset hut and watched his breath fog in the air. The potbelly stove in the corner glowed red hot. The thermometer on the wall read 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, it was 8 below zero. He'd bought the hut for $400 from an Army surplus auction. Corrugated steel, 20 feet wide, 48 feet long, shaped like half a barrel laid on its side. Thousands of them were flooding the market after the war ended. For a logger trying to build a homestead on a tight budget, it seemed like the answer. It wasn't. The steel shell conducted cold like it was designed to. Condensation froze on the inside of the walls every morning. His 2 young daughters, Clara and Ruth, slept in coats under 3 wool blankets. His wife, Evelyn, boiled water on the stove just to add moisture to the air, but it froze on the windows within minutes. Raymond burned through a half-cord of lodgepole pine every week. His neighbor, Frank Benson, who lived in a traditional log cabin with brick-lined walls, used about the same. But Frank's cabin stayed at 65 degrees. Raymond's hut barely held 55. The local solution was simple, according to everyone who offered advice. Insulate with brick. You need thermal mass, said Martin Ashford, the mason who'd built half the chimneys in Ravalli County. Brick holds heat. It radiates. It's what serious builders use. Raymond had watched Ashford work. The man was meticulous. His brick linings were beautiful, tight joints, perfect courses, sandstone accents. But they were also expensive. A full brick insulation job for a Quonset hut would cost $600, maybe $700. Raymond didn't have it, and even if he did, he'd seen the results. His neighbor's brick insulation helped, sure, but it didn't solve the problem. Metal was metal. It bled heat. Raymond needed a different approach. He started thinking about what he did have. He was a logger. He had access to sawdust. He had access to scrap lumber. And he had something else, something nobody considered valuable. Hay bales. Hundreds of them. Left over from a bad harvest, too coarse for feeding cattle, sitting in a shed on the edge of his property. The rancher he'd bought them from had practically given them away. 20 cents per bale. Raymond remembered something from his childhood in North Dakota. Sod houses, dugouts, homes built into the earth, insulated by prairie grass and dirt. They stayed warm in winter and cool in summer. The principle was simple: trapped air, organic fiber, and mass. Hay wasn't sod, but it was cellulose. It was fibrous. And if he stacked it right, it would create thousands of tiny air pockets, dead zones where heat couldn't escape. He ran the math in his head. A standard hay bale was about 18 inches thick. If he stacked them 2 bales deep around the entire Quonset hut, he'd have 36 inches of insulation. That was triple what brick could offer. And the cost? He already owned the bales. Evelyn looked at him like he'd lost his mind. You want to cover our house in hay? Not cover it, Raymond said. Insulate it. She didn't argue. She'd spent 2 winters shivering. If he thought it would work, she'd let him try. But when Raymond started hauling bales to the building site, the neighbors noticed, and they had opinions. Raymond Calloway's plan was specific. He would stack hay bales around the perimeter of the Quonset hut in 2 layers. 1 layer tight against the steel, a 2nd layer offset to break thermal bridging. The bales would sit on a raised gravel foundation to prevent ground moisture from wicking up into the straw. He'd leave a 4-inch air gap between the steel and the first layer of bales to allow any condensation to evaporate. At the roofline, he'd extend the bales up and over the curved steel, creating an insulated envelope. The entire structure would be wrapped in a layer of tar paper to shed rain and snow, then finished with vertical wood slats for weather protection and rodent control. Total thickness: 36 inches of straw plus air gaps. He calculated the R value, thermal resistance, based on what he'd read in a Department of Agriculture bulletin about straw insulation. Loose straw had an R value of about 1.5 per inch. Compressed in a bale, it was closer to 2.0 per inch. That gave him an effective R value of 72 for the wall assembly. By comparison, the brick insulation that Martin Ashford installed offered an R value of about 0.8 per inch. Even at 12 inches thick, Ashford's premium installation, that was R 9.6. Raymond's system was 7 times more effective. But R value wasn't the whole story. Brick had thermal mass. It absorbed heat during the day and radiated it back at night. Straw didn't do that. Straw was pure insulation. It stopped heat from leaving, but it didn't store it. Raymond didn't care. He wasn't trying to store heat. He was trying to keep it inside the building. And for that, insulation beat mass. The engineering made sense. But the appearance did not. When Raymond stacked the first course of bales, his neighbors started talking. Looks like he's building a haystack. That's going to rot in one season. What happens when a mouse gets in there? Whole thing will be a rodent hotel. It's a fire hazard. One spark from that chimney and the whole place goes up. The concerns weren't unreasonable. Straw was organic. It could rot if it got wet. It could harbor rodents if it wasn't protected. And it was combustible, though less so than people assumed. Tightly packed straw didn't burn easily. It smoldered, but perception mattered more than physics. Raymond addressed every concern methodically. For moisture protection, he installed a continuous tar paper barrier with overlapping seams. Water would shed off, not soak in. The raised gravel foundation kept ground moisture away. The air gap behind the bales allowed any interior condensation to escape. For rodent control, he wrapped the base of the bale stack in 1/4-inch hardware cloth, buried 8 inches into the gravel. Mice couldn't chew through it. The vertical wood slats on the exterior were tight-fitted, with no gaps. For fire safety, he maintained a 36-inch clearance between the straw and the stovepipe where it exited the roof. The chimney itself was double-walled steel, insulated to prevent exterior heat transfer. The stove inside sat on a masonry hearth, well away from any combustible walls. He explained all of this to Martin Ashford one afternoon when the mason stopped by to inspect the work. Ashford walked the perimeter, hands in his pockets, shaking his head. "You've thought it through," Ashford said. "I'll give you that. But you're still wrapping your house in hay. It's not dignified. It's not permanent. And when the county assessor sees this, he's going to laugh you off the tax rolls." Raymond didn't respond. He just kept stacking bales. But Ashford wasn't done. And another thing, the mason said, louder now, so the neighbors working in their yards could hear. "Brick is proven. Brick has been used for 2,000 years. You know what they used hay for? Feeding animals. This isn't engineering. It's desperation." Raymond straightened up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and met Ashford's eyes. "We'll see," he said. Martin Ashford wasn't the only one who thought Raymond Calloway had lost his mind. By late November 1948, the hay-wrapped Quonset hut had become a local spectacle. People drove out from Hamilton just to see it. Some laughed. Some took pictures. A few just shook their heads and kept driving. The criticism wasn't just aesthetic. It was structural, financial, and social. At the county building office, the clerk processing Raymond's occupancy permit raised an eyebrow when she saw the construction photos. "This is hay," she asked. "Straw bales," Raymond corrected. "For insulation." She called over the county inspector, a man named Douglas Petrie, who'd been evaluating buildings in Ravalli County for 15 years. Petrie studied the photos, flipped through Raymond's hand-drawn plans, and frowned. "I've never seen this," Petrie said. "I don't know how to classify it. Is it agricultural? Residential? Temporary?" "It's a home," Raymond said. Petrie tapped his pen on the desk. I'll need to see it in person before I approve occupancy. And I'll be bringing the fire marshal. 2 weeks later, Petrie arrived with Fire Marshal Eugene Wardlow, a man who'd fought barn fires across 3 counties and had no patience for risk. Wardlow walked the perimeter of the structure, tested the tar paper with his pocket knife, and inspected the chimney clearance with a tape measure. "You understand that straw is combustible," Wardlow said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Raymond replied. "That's why I maintained clearance and used double-wall pipe. Clearance doesn't matter if embers land on the roof. The tar paper is fire-resistant, and the wood slats are spaced to allow airflow. No ember's going to sit long enough to ignite." Wardlow didn't look convinced. He turned to Petrie. "I can't approve this. If it catches fire, it'll go up faster than a grain elevator. And if it spreads to neighboring properties, the county's liable." Raymond felt his chest tighten. "It's not going to catch fire. You don't know that. I know the physics. Tightly packed straw doesn't combust easily. It smolders, and smoldering requires sustained heat, which I've eliminated with clearance." Wardlow shook his head. "Physics doesn't matter when you're standing in front of a judge after someone gets hurt. I'm recommending denial." Petrie sighed. "I'll submit the report. You'll get a decision in writing." Raymond stood in his yard and watched them drive away. Evelyn came out onto the porch, Clara and Ruth behind her. "What did they say?" Evelyn asked. "They said no." But Raymond had already made up his mind. He wasn't tearing it down. He'd appeal. He'd revise. He'd do whatever it took. Because he knew something the county didn't. This system worked. He'd been living in it for 3 weeks already, and the difference was undeniable. The interior temperature had stabilized at 68 degrees with half the wood he'd burned the previous winter. The condensation was gone. The air felt dry and comfortable. The county could deny his permit, but they couldn't deny the thermometer. Still, the social cost was real. Neighbors stopped waving when they drove past. At the Mercantile in Hamilton, the clerk asked him, loud enough for others to hear, if he was planning to store livestock in his barn. Martin Ashford made it worse. At a community meeting in early December, Ashford stood up during the open comment period and addressed the room. "I want to talk about building standards," Ashford said. "We've got a situation where someone's insulating a home with hay. Not rock wool, not brick, hay. And the county's considering approval." He paused, letting the room react. A few people chuckled. Others murmured. "This isn't just about one man's house," Ashford continued. "It's about what we stand for as a community. Are we serious builders, or are we barnyard tinkerers? Because if we start accepting hay as a legitimate building material, where does it end? Corn husks. Tumbleweed." The room laughed. Raymond, sitting in the back, didn't. "I've built more than 50 masonry systems in this valley," Ashford said. "Brick works. Stone works. Materials that last. Materials that don't rot, don't burn, and don't embarrass the people who live in them." He looked directly at Raymond. "A man's home says something about him. And right now, that hay pile says he's either broke, desperate, or both." Raymond didn't respond. He just walked out. But he remembered every word. January 15th, 1949. The thermometer outside Martin Ashford's brick-insulated cabin read -18 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside, with the fire roaring, it was 61 degrees. Ashford fed another split of ponderosa pine into his masonry stove and rubbed his hands together. The brick walls radiated a dull warmth, but the cold pressed in from every direction. His windows were covered in frost an inch thick. The floor near the door was so cold he could see his breath when he bent down to tie his boots. He'd burned through 2 cords of wood in 3 weeks. Across the valley, Raymond Calloway's Quonset hut sat quiet under its blanket of straw. The fire inside had died down to coals 6 hours ago. The interior temperature was 70 degrees Fahrenheit. This wasn't luck. It was physics. The cold snap that hit Montana in mid-January 1949 broke records across the state. Temperatures in the Bitterroot Valley dropped to -25 degrees Fahrenheit and stayed there for 11 days. Wind chill pushed effective temperatures down to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Snowdrifts buried fences. Livestock froze in the fields. And people burned through firewood faster than they could cut it. Raymond's neighbor, Frank Benson, ran out of dry wood on day 7. He started burning green lodge pole, which smoked, hissed, and gave off half the heat. His cabin dropped to 52 degrees. His wife and children moved into the kitchen and slept near the stove. Another neighbor, a man named Ed Caulfield, had insulated his home with rock wool, a modern material, expensive, supposed to be cutting edge. It helped, but his metal roof radiated cold down into the living space, and no amount of insulation could stop thermal bridging through the studs. He kept his cabin at 58 degrees by running the stove around the clock. Martin Ashford's brick system performed better than most. The thermal mass absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly at night. But the mass only worked if you kept feeding it. The moment the fire died, the bricks started cooling. By morning, the house was cold again. Ashford burned a half cord of wood every 4 days. Raymond burned a half cord every 12 days. People noticed. On day 9 of the cold snap, Frank Benson knocked on Raymond's door. His face was red from wind, his coat dusted with snow. "How are you keeping it warm in here?" Benson asked. Raymond stepped aside and let him in. The interior was dim but comfortable. The stove in the corner held a bed of coals, barely glowing. The air felt dry and still. The thermometer on the wall read 72 degrees. Benson stared at it. "Ow! Insulation," Raymond said simply. "Heat's not leaving." Benson walked to the wall and pressed his hand against the interior surface. It was warm to the touch, not from radiant heat, but from trapped air. The steel shell on the outside was coated in frost. The straw bales between the two surfaces held the temperature differential. "You're using half the wood I am," Benson said. "Less than half." Benson shook his head. Ashford said this wouldn't work. Raymond didn't respond. He just poured Benson a cup of coffee and let the thermometer speak for itself. By day 10, word had spread. People started driving past Raymond's place just to see if smoke was coming from the chimney. It usually wasn't. The fire only needed to be stoked twice a day, morning and evening. The rest of the time, the straw held the heat. On day 11, the cold snap broke. Temperatures climbed back to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and the valley exhaled. But the damage was done. People had seen the difference, and they couldn't unsee it. Stay with me, because the numbers that came out of that winter humiliated the correct method. February 3rd, 1949. Douglas Petrie, the county building inspector, returned to Raymond Calloway's property with a notebook, a thermometer, and a tape measure. The fire marshal, Eugene Wardlow, was with him. So was Martin Ashford. They weren't there to condemn the structure. They were there to measure it. Petrie had received a formal request from 3 property owners in the valley asking the county to reevaluate Raymond's hay-insulated Quonset hut. The request wasn't hostile. It was curious. People wanted to know if the system actually worked or if Raymond had just gotten lucky during the cold snap. Petrie set up a simple test. He would measure the interior temperature of Raymond's hut and compare it to 3 other homes in the valley: Ashford's brick-insulated cabin, Frank Benson's log cabin, and Ed Caulfield's rock wool-insulated house. The conditions were controlled. Each home would maintain a fire at the same intensity for 6 hours, then let it die to coals. Petrie would record the interior temperature every hour for 12 hours. The goal was to measure heat retention, how long each structure stayed livable after the fire went out. The results weren't close. Raymond Calloway's hay-insulated Quonset hut, peak interior temperature, fire-active 74 degrees Fahrenheit temperature after 6 hours, coals only 72 degrees Fahrenheit temperature after 12 hours, fire out 68 degrees Fahrenheit, wood consumed in 24-hour period. 18 pounds Martin Ashford's brick-insulated cabin, peak interior temperature, fire-active 66 degrees Fahrenheit temperature after 6 hours, coals only 61 degrees Fahrenheit temperature after 12 hours, fire out 54 degrees Fahrenheit, wood consumed in 24-hour period. 42 pounds Frank Benson's log cabin, no insulation peak interior. Temperature, fire-active 64 degrees Fahrenheit temperature after 6 hours, coals only 58 degrees Fahrenheit temperature after 12 hours, fire out 48 degrees Fahrenheit, wood consumed in 24-hour period. 45 pounds Ed Caulfield's rock wool insulated house, peak interior temperature, fire-active 68 degrees Fahrenheit temperature after 6 hours, Coals only 63 degrees Fahrenheit temperature after 12 hours. Fire out 56 degrees Fahrenheit. Wood consumed in 24-hour period. 35 pounds. The numbers were undeniable. Raymond's system stayed warmer, longer, with less than half the fuel consumption of the brick-insulated cabin. It outperformed rock wool by nearly 40% in fuel efficiency and maintained a 12-degree temperature advantage after the fire went out. Petrie wrote the numbers in his notebook and underlined them twice. Wardlow stood in Raymond's hut, hands in his pockets, staring at the thermometer. "This doesn't make sense," he said quietly. "It makes perfect sense," Raymond replied. "Straw traps air. It doesn't conduct heat. Brick does." Ashford didn't say anything. He just walked the perimeter of the room, running his hand along the interior walls. The surface was smooth, dry, and warm. No condensation. No cold spots. The temperature was even from floor to ceiling. "What's the R value?" Ashford asked finally. "Around R, 72 for the full wall assembly," Raymond said. "And mine? About R10. Ashford nodded slowly. "So you're 7 times more efficient." "In terms of insulation, yes." Ashford was quiet for a long time. Then he asked the question everyone wanted answered. "What did this cost you?" Raymond had tracked every expense. He pulled a ledger from a shelf and flipped it open. Hay bales, $380 total, $76 tar paper, 12 rolls, $18 wood slats. Milled from his own timber, $0 hardware cloth. 200 feet, $22 gravel for foundation. 2 tons, $8 fasteners, nails, wire. $11 total material cost. $135 Ashford's brick insulation system, by comparison, cost $650 for materials and labor. Raymond's system cost 1/5 as much and performed 7 times better. Petrie closed his notebook. "I'm approving the occupancy permit," he said. "This is the most thermally efficient structure I've seen in this county." Wardlow nodded. "I'm withdrawing my fire hazard objection. The clearance is adequate, and the system is stable." Ashford stood in the center of the room, looking at the walls, the ceiling, the stove. He didn't apologize, but he didn't argue either. "You were right," Ashford said finally. "I didn't think insulation could beat mass. But in this climate it does." Raymond didn't gloat. He just nodded. The test results spread through the valley within a week, and people started asking questions. March 1949, Bitterroot Valley, Montana. The first person to ask Raymond Calloway for help was Frank Benson. Benson showed up on a Saturday morning with a notepad and a tape measure. He didn't apologize for doubting the system. He just asked questions. "How thick do the bales need to be?" 18 inches minimum, Raymond said. 2 layers if you can manage it. "What about the air gap?" 4 inches behind the first layer. "Let's condensation evaporate." Benson wrote it down. "And the tar paper? Overlapping seams. Shed water, don't trap it." Benson nodded, flipped the page, kept writing. By the time he left, he had 6 pages of notes and a rough sketch of the wall assembly. 2 weeks later, Benson started wrapping his log cabin in straw bales. He didn't cover the whole structure, just the north and west walls, where the wind hit hardest. But even that partial insulation dropped his wood consumption by 30%. He told his brother-in-law, who told a cousin in Stevensville, who told a friend in Corvallis. By late spring, 7 homesteads within a 50-mile radius had added straw bale insulation to metal sheds, cabins, and outbuildings. Some used Raymond's full system, double layers, air gaps, tar paper, and slats. Others improvised. One man stacked bales inside his barn and lined them with burlap. Another used them as skirting around a mobile trailer, cutting his propane bill in half. The techniques varied, but the principle stayed the same. Trapped air stops heat loss better than mass. Even Martin Ashford changed his position. In late April, Ashford was contracted to build a masonry chimney for a new homestead outside Darby. The owner, a logger named Paul Driscoll, asked Ashford about insulation options. "I was thinking brick," Driscoll said, "but I heard there's a cheaper way." Ashford set down his trowel. "You're talking about the hay bales." "Yeah. Does it work?" Ashford didn't answer right away. He mixed another batch of mortar, smoothed a joint, and wiped his hands on his apron. "It works," Ashford said finally. "I tested it myself. The R value's higher than anything I've ever installed. And if you do it right, Keep it dry, protect it from rodents, maintain clearance from heat sources. It'll outlast most conventional systems. Driscoll raised an eyebrow. You're recommending it? I'm saying it's a legitimate option, especially if you're on a budget. Ashford didn't build the system himself. That wasn't his trade. But he stopped criticizing it. And in a small community, that mattered. By the winter of 1950, the technique had spread beyond individual homeowners. The county extension office published a bulletin titled Low-Cost Insulation Methods for Rural Structures, which included a 2-page section on straw bale insulation. The authors cited Raymond Callaway's Quonset hut as a case study and included the temperature data from Douglas Petrie's test. The bulletin didn't call it revolutionary. It called it practical. That was enough. Over the next decade, straw bale insulation became a standard option in the Bitterroot Valley for barns, sheds, workshops, and seasonal cabins. It never replaced brick or rock wool for high-end homes. But it carved out a niche, especially among people building on tight budgets in harsh climates. Raymond didn't profit from it. He didn't patent the system or sell plans. He just answered questions when people asked and shared what he'd learned. In 1953, a reporter from the Missoulian visited Raymond's property to write a feature on frontier ingenuity. The reporter asked Raymond if he felt vindicated. Vindicated from what? Raymond asked. The people who said it wouldn't work. Raymond shrugged. They weren't wrong to be skeptical. Hay's not a conventional material. But skepticism's only useful if you're willing to test your assumptions. I tested mine. The thermometer did the rest. The reporter pressed him. But doesn't it bother you that people mock you? Raymond thought about it for a moment. Not really, he said. People mock what they don't understand. That's human nature. But physics doesn't care about opinion. Heat moves through materials at a measurable rate. You can either work with that reality or fight it. I worked with it. The article ran on the front page of the local section. The headline read, Logger's Hay House proves warmth doesn't require wealth. Raymond kept the clipping in a drawer. He never framed it. Here's what Raymond Callaway understood that most people missed. Thermal performance isn't about tradition. It's not about what looks dignified or what's been done for 2,000 years. It's about physics, conduction, convection, radiation, and resistance. Brick has thermal mass. It absorbs heat and releases it slowly. That's useful in climates with large temperature swings between day and night. But in a Montana winter, where temperatures stay below freezing for weeks, thermal mass is a liability. It bleeds heat into the cold exterior faster than you can replace it. Insulation, by contrast, doesn't store heat. It stops heat from leaving. And in a steady-state cold climate, that's what matters. Raymond didn't invent straw bale insulation. The concept had been used in frontier sod houses, dugouts, and agricultural buildings for decades. But he refined it. He quantified it. And he proved it worked in a modern context. The lesson isn't that hay is better than brick. The lesson is that the right solution depends on the problem you're solving. Raymond wasn't being stubborn when he ignored the experts. He was being empirical. He had a hypothesis. Trapped air in organic fiber would outperform thermal mass in extreme cold. He tested it. The data supported him. And when the community saw the data, they adapted. That's not primitive thinking. That's engineering. The broader truth is this. Wisdom isn't about age. Ancient methods aren't automatically better, and modern methods aren't automatically superior. What matters is whether the solution matches the conditions. Raymond's hay-wrapped Quonset hut stood for 32 years. When he finally dismantled it in 1981 to build a larger home, the straw bales were still intact. Dry, structurally sound, no rot, no rodent damage, no fire. The system worked because it was designed to work. Not because it was old, not because it was new, but because it respected the physics of heat transfer. That's the standard we should apply to every solution. Does it solve the problem? Can you measure the result? Will it hold up under real conditions? If the answer is yes, it doesn't matter if the material is brick, hay, or something nobody's tried yet. The thermometer doesn't lie. Now it's your turn. Which part of Raymond's system would you apply to your home today? The double-layer insulation? The air gap? The focus on R value over thermal mass? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what the coldest winter you've ever experienced felt like. If you want more techniques like this, Real methods that worked when survival wasn't optional. Hit that subscribe button. Every week, we dig into frontier engineering that humiliated the experts and saved lives. Thanks for watching. Stay warm out there. Historical accuracy. Quonset huts were widely available as military surplus after World War II. 1945 and 1950. Straw bale construction was used in the Great Plains as early as the 1880s. The Bitterroot Valley, Montana experienced severe cold snaps in the late 1940s. R-value calculations are consistent with modern thermal testing of straw bales. R 1.5 to R 2.0 per inch. Brick thermal mass properties are accurately represented. R 0.2 to R 0.8 per inch, depending on density. Character notes. Raymond Calloway. Fictional composite based on frontier loggers and homesteaders. Martin Ashford. Fictional mason representing period building expertise. All supporting characters are fictional but represent typical community roles. Technical specifications referenced. All temperature measurements, degree F, are plausible for Montana winters. Wood consumption rates are based on period fuel efficiency data. Cost estimates reflect 1949 material prices. In rural Montana, R-value comparisons are scientifically accurate. Educational note. This video presents historically inspired reconstructions for educational and storytelling purposes. Characters, names, and specific events are fictional, while the techniques, concepts, and principles discussed are based on real historical practices and well-established physical or practical knowledge. Any modern application should be evaluated according to current standards, safety guidelines, and applicable laws or regulations. This content is educational in nature and does not constitute professional, technical, or legal advice.